Patsy Miller. I'm a volunteer with the Martin County Historical Society. This is an occasion for us to film Mr. Milton Griffin on our oral history project. Today is February the 22nd, 2008. How are you today, Mr. Griffin?
Oh, about the same old thing. I feel all right most of the time. These things just don't operate.
They don't move right, do they?
And that makes it bad.
Yeah.
I'm telling you it does. I feel like I ought to get out here and do a day's work or run around since my surgery.
What kind of surgery? What kind of surgery?
They discovered a blood clot on the brain, and the doctor said I better take it out or I might spend the rest of my days in a wheelchair. So I do get around a little. No, the only time I've ever fallen, and this has been now 5 or 6 years ago. Walking by the closet door, and I hope you've never fallen, have you? But just completely hopeless, helpless, and down you went. And I bumped my head on a place where they put shoes. It didn't bother me. I didn't even tell anybody. It wasn't bad. It didn't hurt at all. But after a while, I got more I couldn't, not very mobile. So they started examining, putting the different discovered that little blood clot.
Oh, from the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And bumping your head.
Right up there.
Well, you're a tough old man. You're able to come back from that.
Beg pardon?
You're a tough old man. You're able to come back from that.
I don't know how and why I'm around with my medical history. I was born with a double hernia.
You were with a double hernia?
1913.
Wow.
And Dr. Warren, you remember, you know the name, of course, I guess. And just few people had cars. And sometime the hernia popped out, and the parents got the doctor coming. He took me to Taylor Hospital. But by bumping into the road and everything, we got there, it had disappeared. So back home, I don't know why, though, didn't go ahead and do something about it then, because the Dr. Taylors were the top surgeons in eastern North Carolina. But they didn't, so a couple of years later, I went to Norfolk, and Dr. Payne. And believe it or not, I was there 3 weeks for just a hernia repair. But in those days, any surgery, if you didn't move. And my Aunt Louie was with me, and then at night late afternoon she'd leave and go to a cousin not too far there where she spent the night. And I asked her to turn me to the wall so I wouldn't see her leave. And before I left, I was running all over the hospital. I don't know why I stayed there so long.
Well, tell me a little bit about the fishing industry in Janesville.
Well, it's gone, except to catch a few rock, I think, and maybe a drift net, here now and then. Well, somewhere in the early 1920s, an uncle, Charlie Peel, and 2 of his sons, and aboard a slow speed large truck from, I believe it was Mr. Griffin, We drove first time I ever came to Janesville. Somewhere probably 1923. We went across the river to the fishery there, and they had just put out the seine.
Put out the what?
The seine, nets.
Nets, okay.
Had to pull around, and then we brought it back to the fishery, and the other end was stabilized. And had to cut the seines, they call it. There's so many they could bring them in at one time. There was the thing about the size of this room where they put them in, and the herring in there at some places were a foot, 2 feet deep. I never saw such. That was the highlight of. After the end, somehow it just started deteriorating.
Was it overfished, you think?
No doubt, well, some were suggested and thought it might be the Japanese with their huge fishing to set up just outside and caught the herring and processed them right down the ship.
Before they came to up the Roanoke River?
And they have still come up a little way, but not too much in the Williamston or Janesville area.
I see.
And it was a big day. The Enterprise, you might have remember reading it. They call it the key to the smokehouse. Somebody would catch the first herring, about now. And that was. And when we came down here, though, that day, we took, I guess, half a dozen burlap bags that were fertilizer bags. And for people who wanted, this person wants 300, as I said, cut herring. Another want 500. We carried about a half a dozen bags of herring.
How were they processed when you got them to
They
the How were the herring preserved?
Salt. And there was, I don't know how many men in there doing that, but they could take a herring and take a knife and you couldn't, and everything was out, and they chunked them into a huge tub in with salt.
Well, did they dehead them and detail them? Take off their heads and tail and entrails?
Well, I don't know what.
Did they remove the entrails?
Oh, yeah.
How about the head and the eyes?
No, that was left on.
And the tail?
Just that. No, wait a minute. The head was cut off. That's why they started there and went around like that.
I see.
And people then, when they got them home, they put them in a brine. And I remember at home, sometime it's on Friday, Mom would go and get a half a dozen herring and soak them out overnight, get the salt out of it. That was good. Do you remember Mr. Francis Manning?
Yes.
You remember him writing about what they call it, Ponderosa.
Ponderosa?
Colin Martin and Dr. Hammerwright would come out and they would cook a lot, and he'd talk about taking them home, have them next morning for breakfast.
What did the families put the brine in that killed the fish?
It was just a wooden barrel or tub.
Did they sometimes use a crock? A crock?
Well, it all depends upon how many they wanted to use.
And did their stores have barrels of fish to sell? If you went out to Farm Life to the general store there, did they have barrels of fish to sell?
No one does, no store. Matter of fact, wasn't any store at that time.
Everybody lived at home.
That's right. Well, now, my dad had a store sometime in the early 20s when it started. He bought it from his two brothers who made a home in the upstairs of this the store building. And I would go with him to Washington. That's where he'd go to replenish his stock. And sometimes he'd buy a bucket of mullets. And I never could even had the fat fish. It took us a full day to go to Washington, to go to, but he kept everything in that store people would need, from clothing to boat cloth, lace, anything you think of, except in fresh vegetables and meat. Of course, they had 2 or 3 apple tobacco and brown mules too.
Oh. How about snuff?
Oh, yeah, snuff. And he had it in little packages. Let's see, one of them was railroad, called railroads. And then you buy it in bladders. And way out a little bit for people who wanted it. And cigarettes, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and Camel and Chesterfield.
Right. You
Then
never did smoke, did you?
Yes, a little bit. Matter of fact, my mother offered my brothers and me, J.R. and Fred, $20 when we got 21 years old not to smoke. Well, we took her up on it. But when I went to Washington, I fell into some bad company, I guess. There was a guy working in the state, back in the book stacks where the books were, and an elevator. They had a smoking room, believe it, in the library.
And this was when you worked at the Library of Congress in D.C.
He'd come by and say, when we all probably had gotten all the books out that people were going to use that evening, and so we'd go and smoke and I got so the things tasted pretty good. But one morning I got up and such a taste of it, I said, I ain't smoked in this. I didn't get hooked on to the point that I couldn't give it up, so I haven't smoked. Now and then, neighbor down the road, Mr. Louis Leonard Lilly, he's gone now, of course. I tended his land a few years. I'd go over to visit with him, and he'd sit there and say, let's have one. So I'd smoke with him.
So when you left, why'd you leave Washington and the job in the library?
I became disgusted with I moved from the library, the agriculture department, and they did some foolish things. They sent me to Baltimore every day, 1 week, to ask people, do they keep their ration books for oil, or did the supplier? Can you imagine that?
No.
Another one that they sent out to ask people if they had holding their war bonds, or whether they had customary. So I got a little bit fed up with it, and the half a dozen more people working that little section would come in about 15 minutes late with a newspaper stuck on his arm, come in, fall back, pick up the paper and read. And in about a half an hour, it was time for break. And I went to the supervisor, and he said, well, that don't bother me. Senator King, I believe was his name, visited one of the departments, somewhere it was agriculture or somebody else. And every place he'd go pass by, nobody working. So when he got back to the Senate, on the Senate floor, he really gave him a going over. But would you believe that he apologized when some outfit laborers let him know that we were on a snack? So we...
Well, we're having a break.
that was... anyway, I decided I'd had enough. And one morning going in toward the Capitol building on Maryland Avenue, coming out of Landover Hills, Maryland, we stopped for a traffic light, and for the first time, I saw his cars passing by. I said, will I be doing this 5, 10, or 15 years from now? I just had a complete flow. When I got back home that afternoon, I advised Wilma, well, I'm going home by me a farm. So in the early days, we played baseball, and Albert Gherkin, you probably heard of him. He was a little bit older than I was. We played ball on the same team. And I don't know how many times he would say, how about selling your farm? He owned some out in Beaufort County, Bluefield. Well, when I came home, he's the first person I take. Well, the story is the same old thing. Well, I guess I won't sell it now. So that was that. But one day, well, the next day or sometime, it was a rainy day. Of course, not, and hot, not cool as it is today. I came down here. My sister and her husband lived across that corner there, in that house. But that was not there. They had the old Joe Martin home. They still lived in it. So I came down to see how they were doing. And I was standing at the end of the truck at the back, away from where they came in. Carl and his tenants came out of the field, wet, tired, and not too good a mood. So when he saw me, what are you doing home? I said, I came home to buy a farm. I got one I'll sell you. So this farm here, there's a ditch running through there. I don't know whether he had any regrets after then or not. I never heard him say, but that was the...
Tell me about your farming experience. It's hard work.
Oh, yeah. Well, I started farming, of course, when I was just a kid. Just to reach up and hold the plow handles. And that, of course, we planted tobacco, corn, peanuts, soybeans, and cotton for a while until the boll weevil drove us out of it. In the late 20s, the boll weevil and cotton was unprofitable. So tobacco was the money crop. And every farmer, and all a small farm, but they all had tobacco and had curing barns. Mm-hmm. And that was really, and the opening sale day in Williamston was just like a holiday. Some people had their first tobacco cured and tied and taken to market. And another thing that was attractive, it was new model cars were there at that date. And so it was everybody looking at the cars. And at that time there was 3 movies houses in Williamston. Watts, Vicar, and Marco. Right. You know where they are?
Yeah. I remember them.
And you kids could go for a dime or a quarter. Well, it was a big day. And there was always somebody selling barbecue, and I remember I had just started driving Model T, and we were on our way home. We got there close to Old Mill Inn. There was a man lying across the road. Of course, I pulled off and stopped. But I don't know whether the guy was drunk or drugs or what. But pretty soon somebody came along with, what do they call it? Had a rumble seat in the car. And we somehow talked him into taking the guy on to Washington or somewhere. That's what we saw him. But I never saw the guy lying in the middle of the road.
Makes you wonder what happened to him.
I never heard. I don't know.
So how long did you farm? How many years did you work the farm yourself?
Well, I was farming at home with my dad until 31. Well, I did go right on. I had a crop after I went off to college. Of course, I graduated from Williamson in 31. And then went on to Campbell College with Raymond Griffin. I was there 2 years. And in the summertime, I would have a crop at home. And my dad had let me have a crop ever since I could remember. So I had, during all that time when money was short, I had a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I was lucky.
Good for you.
I was very lucky.
Yeah.
So,
How did you and Wilma meet?
at Campbell College.
Uh-huh.
I remember we had a chapel every day. Dr. A.J. Campbell would sit on the stage and come make remarks and a prayer and so forth. And he would try to get the boys not to smoke. Yet the building he was in was paid for by tobacco. You're out there, but I don't see you. He'd wave his hand across the... And the ones that did smoke right up to without anything left. But they keep it though, and somebody had a little machine turn, they could put that tray and make a cigarette, not have to roll it.
Oh, really?
I was there, as I said, 2 years. Wilma was there until the first semester of 31. Y'all talk to her about that. We were at a meeting on a Sunday afternoon in the front room of the building. And then probably a half a dozen of us there, and she was one of them. And she made this announcement that she would not be back next month. Boy, that hit me hard.
Oh.
I sit over here on this edge of the auditorium, and she was out in the middle. And I kept quite a bit of time looking over there. And Corinne took me back up there, Campbell, when was it? And Dr. Wiggins was his principal, and president, and he did a lot of that college, junior college grew into quite a university.
Got an excellent reputation.
Its law school is way up at the top. Wiggins established that. He retired, and now he's just, I think he's chancellor, but somebody said he was, oh, matter of fact, he's dead. He died.
They have a dental school, a pharmacy school, and a ministry, what is it? The ministers go and train there?
Somewhere I have a book with all the, I think one comes early this week from Campbell about it. There was one some time ago. They would call it the celebrating the Founders Day. Well, I looked through that thing. I never did find the name of A.J. Campbell, who was the founder. It started as an academy to high school in 1880 something. But he was not mentioned the Founders Day. I couldn't believe it.
That's too bad.
I was tempted, and I'm always when I read something, I'd like to write a letter about it, to write and ask what goes on. The Founders Day and the founder not mentioned.
You enjoy, I enjoy reading your letters to the editor, the Enterprise. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
What I do now,
When you write these letters, they mainly concern community life.
well, I read a story in the paper, and somehow I either got to make a comment I don't agree with or something, I start dash off.
I know. I read your letters to the editor. I believe this school situation the school consolidation sort of causes you to take sides.
That has been a thing. Janesville and Beargrass have been under the gun for a long time. But we've been able to hold out, beat them until now. Mm-hmm. And for the first time that a Board of Education could vote on closing, that's the first time it's happened, right, all that time.
40 years. They've been debating for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. In '65, they had a vote on the bond issue, defeated. '67, another one, defeated. Mm-hmm. '69, another one. But the strange thing about that was, the first one, they wouldn't even tell us where the school would be. Can you imagine that?
No.
The second one, they allowed, well, it'll be somewhere in the center of the county. And the third one got to the point, I believe it was somewhere out on 17. I've forgotten just the spot that they had decided to be in that area. Uh-huh. Well, every one of them was defeated decisively. After then, it rolled on pretty good until started rearing up again. The biggest fight was in '96 when Mike Van Nettingham, George James, and I don't know the other, but it was a colored lady on the board, at a meeting, I believe it was on August the 12th, 1996. The colored lady did and made a motion. The Board of Education asking the county commissioners to start looking up for money to build one school. Nobody had heard anything about it. And they declared afterwards that they hadn't discussed it. They didn't know she was going to make that motion. Well, Steve Wolf was on the board at that time. And a meeting he was going to, these two, they were discussing it. Mm-hmm. And he reminded them of it, but to call him a liar and that you didn't do it. But that,
is that politics?
Do you remember that?
Uh-huh.
You remember the Board of Education hired some outfit to come in and go to the 20,000 or 22,000. They paid this group, and they're going to sell that idea of one school to the county.
Yeah, I do remember.
Well, they had 4 forums, one in each of the high schools. They wanted Janesville, the auditorium was packed. Not a single person spoke in favor of consolidation. The next one was in Williamston, and that was rather unusual. Very few people attended because Williamston stood to gain everything.
Right.
Somebody said there was about 30 people. I didn't go to that particular one, and most of those were from Janesville and Belgrade.
Uh-huh.
Well, then they went on to Roanoke, and there they found one person, a teacher, beginning of the program, said we should have a consolidated school. One person in all these 4 forums that spoke in favor of it. At Beargrass, it was terrific. Some guy, I wish I knew who he was, asked this man who was doing, what's the paying you? He told him. He questioned something else. Asked about the third question, he shut up. He wouldn't answer anymore. Well, it got so, I put in the letter, I think I wrote it in the letter, that I'd pay the $20,000. I said, just get the heck out of here. Anyway, they not able to, and the big thing, of course, is always money. Money, money, money. Mm-hmm. That determines everything, or lack of it.
Right.
And what bothers me now, and I have a letter, I'm going to send it, I don't know whether it's published or not, on this thing. The NC statute reads, in closing or consolidating schools, the main concern, number one, is the welfare, the well-being of the students involved. The inconvenience, distance of travel, and how also about the support of the community for the school. Well, that you wouldn't find improve it better in Janesville and Beargrass, I'll guarantee you that.
Absolutely.
But you know, in all their meetings, that was discussed. And these 4 people, I call them the Big 4. Johnny Bryant, Milton Matthews, and Ms. Liggett, and what's the other one's name? You've seen them probably. Voted to close the school. That's a sad day for Janesville and Beargrass. Wilma and I had 4 children, 3 grandchildren, graduated from Janesville High School. They all went on to the university system. One to Greensboro, graduated magna cum laude.
Ooh.
5 went to Chapel Hill. And one now is a senior at Wilmington. Of course, you probably read the letters to 2 or 3 of the students. I believe Sarah Chesson wrote a letter about me not being able to take advanced courses, you know. And then I believe the Harris girl. But what we paid for that is just a little bit out of line for what this word were. I maintain, and a lot of other people, that if the Board of Education didn't work with the commissioners, there's money that could do what needs to be done. But all that, Bryant went on the board favoring full schools. But when he got inside, if you remember reading, he saw that, of course, money. So money, lack of it, determines everything.
What do you think about the threats Johnny Bryant has received?
What about what?
Threats.
Oh, well, that shouldn't have been done, but I know I can understand how people are so wrought up that do anything. And of course, the Enterprise said that we were acting childish and immature. Well, what do you expect when you're going to lose your school, your community destroyed? You're supposed to say, oh, yes, fine, we enjoy that. Well,
You were principal at Farm Life, right?
well, at first I was a teacher in high school.
You taught in Williamston.
I taught in Williamston 35, 37. And then I went on to Washington. When I came back, I think I told you Mr. Manning was looking to anybody that could find me.
Say that again, please. Huh? Mr. Manning was looking for?
Looking for anyone, a teacher, who could write their name.
Just wanted to be sure he got that.
Or something similar to that.
Right.
I would be the exact same.
You had to fill those classrooms.
Huh?
You had to get teachers for those classrooms.
Well, Ethel T. Robertson was principal from 46 on to Ms. Barnes, Lucille Barnes, and Aunt Iris Taylor, home ec teacher, meet up to high school. No, Ms. Barnes was in the 7th grade, that's right. She was there for quite a while. She and Ms. Mason. Did you ever hear it? Know any? And Pat Gaylord's wife, Edmondson, what was her first name?
Can't remember.
Well, she taught there quite a while. She still living?
Maribel?
Maribel.
Yes, she's living. I play cards with her once a month. I play cards with Maribel once a month.
Did she ever mention anything about our teaching?
Uh-huh, yes. She's a lot of fun.
I guess she, Miss Courtney, she's still around. Yeah. She taught music sometime at there.
She's very talented. She can play the piano very well.
It was something that her sons went up the Appalachian Trail, didn't he? He's gone, isn't he? Well, I walked a little bit way on the Appalachian Trail a couple of times. My kids are too good to me. They take it. That was some experience. I believe one time we were up near Virginia, the other time down further south.
Your children took you? Your children went with you?
Well, Ken went the first time, then Diane, all of them eventually went. We went 2 or 3 times.
Well, tell me about growing up in Smithwick Creek community.
Well, there was no excitement. I mean, the big thing for young people, the girls would, on a Saturday night, a girl, particularly in the spring or summer, would invite her friends and for a weekend. And of course they had a lot of fun, and When they were old enough, some of the guys started following around. We played, the boys, everybody had to play baseball. Everybody in my cousins, everybody was expected to play baseball. And a lot of people like to fish and hunt in the hunting season. There was very little excitement. Of course, after we could had a car, a Model T, we'd go to Williamston for a movie. And by the way, in 1927, I believe it was, I saw my first cowboy movie. Buddy Roosevelt, and I think Diane chased him on the internet. He also another name. He'd been in several movies. But to see walking that horse around all the hills, I just must get out there. I want to go. But then finally, in '39, while I was in Washington, there was a co-worker. I happened to hear him talking in the office. They was going on vacation. I waited outside. I said, how are you going? He was going to California. Santa Rosa, his home. He said, I guess I'll take the train. I said, well, how about going with me? We'll drive a car. Of course, he liked that. So we crossed. And the thing about it is so amazing to me now. I don't remember a single motel or place where we stopped. I do remember going by Boys Town and stopped there and went through. And that was when you make that movie. That was after the NRA. But I remember that statue up there. The boy, you've seen it. It was a complete town within itself, with the youngsters running it. Now it's not quite that way.
Well, did you go to Hollywood?
Well, let's see, going through Nebraska, we overtook a new car, a Dodge car, driving around with 35 miles an hour. Young lady was driving. So we drove outside her and asked her something. She didn't pay much attention to us. But somewhere we had some candy or something or other, and she took, we talked, of course there's no traffic on the road, so we had both sides of the road. We stopped somewhere in Nebraska and had something to eat and went to see a movie, The Man in the Iron Mask. I remember it was the movie. Well, we were going to, after the movie, we were going to find a place someplace Sunday night. But everybody was feeling good. The moon was full, bright. So we decided to continue on. With one of us, the other guy, Crawford Brooks, would sleep in the back of her car, and we'd drive along. And at about sunrise, we arrived in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that's where we parted. She went on. What it was, see, in those days, you didn't find any seized cars being loaded up. Right here, people from Williamson drove cars from Detroit. So she was driving that one for somebody from Detroit to, let's see,
Dealer?
somewhere in California.
Mm-hmm.
And we went there, we had her address, I never did get her name. It's the stupidest thing.
I'm surprised.
But we did have her, get her address, and when we got down there not Pensacola, but Pasadena, went and nobody home. Mm-hmm. Well, the highlight there was I went down the Rose Bowl.
Oh.
And we left there and we headed back home. But you don't want to hear all this. The morning that we were leaving San Francisco, I had a pain. I didn't hear it just wouldn't go away. So this guy, I knew somebody everywhere, but in San Francisco, they had these first aid areas or something. So we stopped at one, and the guy gave me some morphine. It didn't stop it.
Really?
But he knew somebody, Miss Clyde Sweet was her name. And he said she was part of the women's club, anyway. She had an apartment in Oakland. And she was going to be away from her one where she headed there. And so she asked us, so we went to her apartment while she was going away across the way. And the doctor there asked him, "Go give me something else." What is it? He said, "Well, give me some morphine." I said, "I just had some." So he figured I had enough. And it turned out, I guess, it was a kidney stone.
Oh, my goodness. Tough.
That was, so when we stayed there in that apartment a couple of days, and we left there, I was going to come back home. Let's see, we come back by way of Grand Canyon, I reckon, and we saw Old Faithful play. I have a snapshot here somewhere. There was probably a dozen people sitting up here on a log as the Old Faithful erupted.
Right.
Well, we walked to a restaurant, and on the restaurant, on the table, there was a thing that Old Faithful will play at a certain time.
Oh.
It was almost like clockwork.
Really?
So we were there when it erupted.
Oh.
The Old Faithful will play. Now they don't have any idea when
Is that right?
it about played out.
Y'all get back to Washington?
Yes, we came on back, and I came on home. Well, my home's out at Creek area. At Rocky Mount, he took the train back into Washington. I just didn't feel like I wanted to go back to work.
Did they know you were leaving for good?
Beg pardon?
Did the people in Washington know that you were leaving the Department of Agriculture for good?
Yeah, I resigned. Matter of fact, I was one of those days when all that stuff was going on. I got disgusted with it and was going to leave. So I asked the person how. Well, you go if you want to resign, you have to go. So I did resign.
Well, down at the community of Smithwick's Creek, Life revolved around what two places?
What? What place?
Places. The church and the school.
School. The Griffin School was right there in sight of my home and right across the road from Smith. Have you been out there? Have you?
Yes. So the whole community was joined by those two institutions.
Smithers Creek Church started in 1803. Primitive Baptist. And there was the only church until, I don't know when the others came in. And of course, I have, is that here?
I think you're talking about this book or the map. Yeah, that's the map.
Oh, where is that letter?
Let me look, see if it's in here.
Over here.
There it is.
This is from Ashley Hardison's daughter, Thelma. And well, there's the road. Anyway.
Tell us what it says.
Huh?
Tell us what it says.
Well, let's see, Smith Street Church. It's supposed to be here.
It gave the dimensions of the property, right? That letter explained the property boundaries, right?
The church, you mean?
Uh-huh.
No, I don't know what, anyway. The church had, well, that does beat all. Yeah, this is the,
Right.
tell what the church stood for and so forth.
Yes, about the doctrine and what,
Well, you know what happened?
tell us what happened.
Well, in the late 1920s, you ever heard of, I guess, of W.B. Harrington?
No?
He was the preacher head for some little time, but somehow he got away from the primitive Baptist doctrine. He went more or less to the idea you could work your way to heaven, you know. The primitive Baptist said it was a matter of faith. So the church split on that.
Yeah.
Into three ways. The original stayed there. One went down to Lily Hall area, and there's one near the Tice home. That was something. It was really,
That wasn't during your lifetime, was it?
yeah, it was in the 20s.
Oh. So
And-
you were a boy then. You could remember that.
Huh? Oh, yes,
You were just a boy.
this Thelma Winmer was Thelma Hardison, Mr. A.C. Hardison, the last clerk of the court there. Of course, they went to court, you know.
They did.
Yeah.
Oh.
And the court ruled in favor of who was? And you ever hear of Doss Griffin? He was one that went to the one group opened a church or a school up at in Lilies Hall area, and the other group built a new building, and it's still standing in the Tices. That's just split the community. Somehow most people couldn't get the idea that primitive Baptist doctrine. If you read that they believed that the thing from the foundation of the world was.
Do you still profess to be a primitive Baptist in faith?
No, it's
You personally?
No, I never did join. Now the primitive Baptists, very few young people. It was middle age before they would join the church. And I was born in 1913. This was going on in the late 20s, so I hadn't joined.
What church are you affiliated with?
But if I'm affiliated, one of us, it's the Missionary Baptist out here. I'm afraid the church is not one of my strong.
Well, we have had a nice visit with you, Mr. Milton, and being it's Sunday, we're going to let you have the rest of the day off. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry if it got off the...
You didn't. You did a good job. Fine job.
Well, the church now is controlled by, anything about it?
Not much.
You know, Mr. Names somehow have a hard way.
We're doing those,
Oh, Shaw, that guy. Well, it's probably, my cousin was the last member there. And the Cahuki Association was what they were members of. And when the church sort of broke up, I called a person in Tarboro and asked, what about the church? He said, well, it all depends on how it was started. Well, in 1803, William Perry, where is he? Well, that's not there.
The envelope's in your lap.
William
Yes.
Perry.
Uh-huh.
That's the copy of the deed to the church. And that's the thing is so interesting to me about...
Let me see this just a minute, please. See, This was delivered in the presence of Henry Robertson. He's one of my descendants. He came from down this area. Robertson did. I just learned that. Isn't that interesting how all these lines...
Well, this is my interpretation of this.
Uh-huh.
Here's Swain Branch. Of course, it's mentioned here, but
There's the school.
here's the schoolhouse,
There's
the church, and the well here.
Well, probably served both of them. My Granny Green, Granny out of Virginia Peel, went to that church. She was a member there. But it was a long time before your day.
Well, the early days, of course, that was the only church in that area. And their big association meeting was something. It started on Friday and ended on Monday. And people, I think I told you about this before, didn't I?
I don't know.
People coming to the church would come in from way off by train. And there's a George Peel had a Model T. And he delivered those people from the train to different places in the community. That was a big thing. Biggest crowd I ever saw at that time. And one of the unusual things about it is they didn't allow anybody to sell anything on the church property. So they went across the road up here, and the guy did, and sold.
So food?
Yeah. Well, they had, of course, a terrific meals served, picnic,